All right, everybody. Welcome back to Endurance Sports University, the Triathlon Study Hall. We are up to episode number 12. We got some good stuff tonight. A little bit about me for those of you that don't know me or never met me. My name is Ryan Reel, USAT Level 2 coach, USAT Youth and Junior Certified coach, master's degree in exercise physiology, biomechanics, second master's in organic and biological chemistry, USA Triathlon high performance team head coach and team director, former elite coach at Training Bible Coaching, was there from 2013 to earlier this year before I broke off and founded Endurance Sports University. So a little bit about ESU for those of you that haven't been here before or don't know much about us. International leader in triathlon education, coaching resources, and services for athletes who are looking for personal coaching. Self-coached athletes or athletes on a budget, our membership program has got some outstanding stuff. And then the coaches that are out there working with other athletes, trying to help teach them the finer points of coaching, how to run a business, etc., and really try to grow the sport of triathlon in general. So the membership program, a little bit about that: 4-week commitment, 28-day notice to quit, $49.99 every 4 weeks. If you want to give it a shot for free for 2 weeks, absolutely no obligation afterwards, use the discount code MPRO-2-weeks, and that'll get it for you. Some of the highlights: Triathlon Study Hall call pretty soon. These are going to go to being only members of Endurance Sports University. Gets you 4 weeks of a training program of your choice, distance and level, Facebook group with the forum, weekly accountability, all kinds of great stuff out there. Video archives, some specific articles that are written specifically for you guys and for you gals. So pretty interesting program. Definitely getting some positive feedback on that. The quick special we're doing for the remainder of the month. If you register for 6 months of the M Pro, you are entered to win that Garmin 920 XT. You sign up for the 12-month option, you got 2 entries. We're going to draw on October 1st. So there you go. All right, let's get into this evening. We are going to talk about run pacing and strategy, and then we'll get into the question and answer session. So let's get rolling. All right, so pacing strategies. There are about 7 pacing strategies that are out there in the scientific literature that have been used in sporting events. What we're talking about specifically is the running segment in triathlon. And what you're going to see as we go through these 3 different pacing strategies, a lot of the graphs are actually drawn up or made for cycling, but the same exact strategy occurs for running also. So you're getting a little bit of the cycling stuff here too, along with the run stuff. So the 3 pacing strategies we're going to talk about is negative pacing, even pacing, and variable pacing. So let's go ahead and get into that. All right, so negative pacing, also known as negative splits. It's very simple. The second half of the run needs to be slightly faster than the first half, right? So you see here, it's obviously a cycling graph, power output, but this could very easily be substituted for running speed. Very simple. All right, so all that means when we're looking at negative pacing or negative splits for the run, the second half needs to be 1 second or more faster. That's it. You don't need to have some ridiculous 5-minute, oh, look, my second half was 5 minutes faster. If someone ever comes back to that with me, my answer is going to be, what were you doing on the first half? Why didn't we run that 4 minutes faster on the first half? And then just have a simple minute faster, still have negative splits. All right, so there's your negative splits. What are some of the benefits of it? All right, so it's going to give you a reduced rate of carbohydrate depletion throughout the entire event. You're going to be taking it a little bit easier on the front half, a little bit harder on the second half. It's going to lower the blood lactate concentrations for at least the first third to half of the effort, lowers the oxygen consumption, so the volume of O2 or VO2 that's required. And it's also going to limit fatigue that's related to a lot of metabolites that float around the body as we're training or racing, such as inorganic phosphates, potassium, and then hydrogen ions, which is essentially the lactic acid that we are talking about when we say blood lactate. It's going to limit the fatigue that is related to those. So there's your negative splits or negative pacing. So I'm going to go through all 3 of these, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie them into triathlon. So I want everybody to have a really good idea of what the pacing is before we really start getting specific. So there's negative pacing. All right, events to use negative pacing or negative splits for: single sport events that normally are middle or long distance, right? So what does that mean? Pure running, anything that's 10K or less is probably going to be perfectly fine with aiming at negative pacing. Any single sport, like just a half marathon or just a marathon, negative pacing can work very well. When we get into triathlon, that starts to become a lot more challenging and a lot more difficult, especially when we get to the half Ironman and the full Ironman distance. If you are a very high caliber elite athlete or about to become an elite caliber athlete, you can get away with this in triathlon for a half Ironman or maybe even a full Ironman distance. You would be really pleased to knock this out at an Olympic distance event. Sprint distance, definitely something that's doable. All right, so there's negative pacing. Positive pacing, here's the second one. Right, so this is a gradual decline in power or speed or heart rate over the duration of the event. So what you're seeing here, this graph was recreated from a journal article I read way back when I was in grad school. This is actually talking about an Ironman. So if we take a look at this, this is the distance in kilometers. We have the athlete's heart rate right here, and we'll get to heart rate and speed and input and output here shortly. But what I want to really focus in on here is what's happening with the run, right? And what we're seeing here with this graph, we're seeing a decline in heart rate, which might or might not happen. But what you're ultimately going to see in most Ironman distance events is just a gradual decline in running speed, right? Whether that's starting off at a 7-minute pace and ending at a 7:15, or starting off at an 8-minute pace and ending up at a 15-minute pace, right? So the general take home from positive pacing and from this graph is we're going to have a gradual decline in output, meaning power or speed on the run, over the duration of the entire event. And this, as we get to long distance events, we get to a marathon, we get to an Ironman, this is what we're going to see. Whether you are Mirinda Carfrey, who is the 2-time reigning Ironman world champion, or whether you are a first-time off the couch, want to do an Ironman athlete, this is going to happen to you, right? The degree to which it happens, Mirinda Carfrey is going to have a far smaller drop off than what we're going to see with a first-time off the couch Ironman. Okay, so what are some of the results? Positive pacing, meaning we're going to start out and we're going to go at the intensity that we want, and we just simply know it's going to drop off, and I'm going to continue pushing this pace. Okay, so we're going to see an increased RPE in the early stages because you're going to be working harder. We're going to see an increased oxygen consumption, and we're going to see an increase in those fatigue-related metabolites, especially lactic acid, depending on the intensity. Right, so these are some of the results that we're looking at for positive pacing. So what do we really want to do in a longer event, right? So if we're talking half Ironman, half marathon, a marathon, something like that, we're going to see a gradual reduction in intensity like we discussed because of these 4 main things that are up on the screen. You're going to have an increased rate of glycogen depletion, right? So you're going to burn through the carbohydrates that you have stored before the race in your system a lot faster. You're going to have to therefore replace them as you are racing. We're going to have an altered substrate utilization, right? So if we're looking at an Ironman race, let's say, and we want to have you go out and ride at 65% of FTP, and the goal is to run in zone 2, right? And that is what you are preparing for. That's what your training program is built around. That's what it's designed to specifically prepare you to do. Right? And if you check out some of the previous TSH calls, you'll see all kinds of stuff about race plans, run splits, how to run the Ironman marathon, how to plan the bike course, how to put together a bike plan, all this type of stuff, which is getting to the point of it is a program specifically designed for you to execute a specific plan. If you are now changing that, you're looking at an altered substrate utilization. So substrate utilization or metabolic efficiency, what that's basically referring to is your RER or your respiratory exchange rate, which is at a given intensity, you are burning X% of fat and Y% of carbohydrates. As our intensity increases, we start to burn more carbohydrates, hence the increased glycogen depletion. Right? So as we start shifting that, if our training hasn't accounted for that, you're going to have a major problem on race day. Third thing, neuromuscular fatigue. That's simply being out there and swimming, biking, and running for a long period of time, right? And then we have the psychological implications of the increased RPE. When RPE, or rate of perceived exertion, is increased, it's harder. That's why it's higher on the RPE scale, right? So if we are operating at a higher intensity, we're racing harder than what we have trained for or what we're prepared for, we're going to have some major psychological implications. So there's the positive pacing, right? Even pacing. All right, so when we're looking at even pacing, what we're looking at is a good strategy for something for a prolonged endurance event. This could be marathon, this could be half Ironman, this can be full Ironman, maybe even a half marathon. And what the goal is, we're simply just going to try to keep an even output throughout the whole thing, right? So in this case, on the bicycle, this athlete very well might have said, all right, I'm just going to lock it in at 240 watts for whatever this event is, and my goal is to just maintain 240 watts, right? And that is the bedrock of a good, solid cycling race plan in triathlon. We need to know what's our output, what power output do we want to ride at, so what's our normalized power for the ride, and what pace do I need to ride at, what's my average speed. If you can execute that, you're going to execute the race plan. It's absolutely that simple, and it is not that easy. If it was that easy, everybody would be doing outstanding stuff at every single triathlon they do. So the execution, not super simple. The strategy, the theory behind it, pretty straightforward. All right, so that's what we're aiming at. So this is for, let's say it's the half marathon at the end of a 70.3, right? And your goal is, hey, I just want to run at a 7:30 pace for the full 13.1 miles. It's going to put me in right around 140, and you just simply keep your pace at a 7:30, right? That's even pacing, super simple, right? The rationale for it is the starting strategy, meaning what are we doing in that very first part of a race? And if we're going to use the half Ironman example, what am I going to do in the first 2 or 3 miles of the run, right? That is less important due to the duration of the event, right? So we got 1.2 mile swim, 56-mile bike, 13.1-mile ride. 70.3 miles, the first 3 miles of the run is not the key part of this event, right? If you were only running a half marathon, first 3 miles now really matter. Those 3 miles are not super duper must execute perfectly. They are super duper important to the overall race. So the starting strategy is less important due to the duration of the event and the lower amount of time spent accelerating, right? So in a half Ironman, if I look at a power file or a run file and I see a whole bunch of spikes in power output or running speed, my question is going to be, what the heck is this person doing? I'll look at the terrain, see, hey, are they climbing? Are they climbing and descending? That's a reasonable thing. Nope, perfectly flat. What that means is, for whatever reason, and I've seen this before, you get out there, they're on the bike, they're cruising along, and somebody passes them. They're like, nope, not going to happen. They accelerate to get back around them, and they keep playing this leapfrog game. Same thing on the half marathon, on the run, half marathon, whatever it may be. All right, so the starting strategy, not super important due to the duration of the event and the lower amount of time spent accelerating, right? This is a very good strategy, and it is best when an athlete is in a stable condition, right? Meaning the terrain and meaning the environment, right? So if we look at a couple different Ironman events, right? If we compare Ironman Florida, which is the equivalent of riding on a pancake, it's that flat, and we compare that to Ironman Wisconsin, where the only really flat part of that entire bike course is transition. There's a lot of flat running out there, but it's a tremendously up and down course. That's not stable, right? That makes it very hard to keep even pacing when we're climbing and then we're descending. We're climbing and then descending. That becomes very difficult to do. So even pacing, something that's really good for a very flat, very stable, very even throughout the entire thing, bike course and run course in a triathlon. Right? When it comes to the environment, we need to look at the weather, we need to look at the wind, right? So if we compare, Ironman Wisconsin to Ironman Texas is a lot flatter, but it's also a heck of a lot windier, right? So now if I have to deal with a bunch of wind the entire time, which is providing resistance and then no resistance, then no resistance throughout an entire bike ride, and for a good portion of the run at least, those aren't stable conditions to try to execute an even pacing strategy. All right, so the last one, the fourth one, and this is the one that ultimately works best for triathletes. In the real world, variable pacing strategy is the most beneficial. It's the easiest to execute, and it gives you the most leeway when it comes to picking a pacing strategy and executing it to perfection. All right, so what the goal is with variable pacing, the athlete is simply attempting to maintain a constant intensity over variable terrain with variable weather and variable race conditions. Right? So if you're racing at Ironman Florida, you have nice weather, chances are even pacing strategy, no issue. You go to Ironman Wisconsin, Coeur d'Alene, any of the other ones that have any real terrain change in it, and a variable pacing strategy is going to be the way to go. All right, so if we take a look at the graph that I just popped up right here, we're now getting very specifically into the run. And this is a study that came out 2008, 2009, somewhere in that area. Was a real breakthrough study. What they were looking at is what pacing strategy were runners using, right? And they took a look at 10K runners. They broke them into two groups. We have a high performance group, which basically meant you'd run 35:30 or faster. A low performance group meant 39 minutes or slower in the 10K. All right. And what they found, there's all these different, solid lines that we see coming through here. These are all the different participants in the study. Same thing down here with all the dashed lines, right? They didn't give these guys and gals any real instruction on, hey, do this, then that, finish this way. They didn't do that. They said, go run it. Let's see what you guys do. And what you're seeing here is variable pacing, and it's following along with this strategy right up here across the top. So it's going to be a fast start. It's going to drop into even pacing, and then it ends with an end spurt. That in and of itself as a whole is variable pacing, even though we have a fast start, even pacing in the middle, and an end spurt, right? So if we take a look at this, the group that was the higher performing group started off with a fast start right here. You can see let me orient you here first. So this black line that's coming straight across here, that's the average pace of the entire group. The blue line is the average pace at that given point throughout the entire 10K. The green line, average pace throughout the whole 10K. This gray dotted line that you can't see very well, that's the average pace throughout the entire 10K. Okay, so what we're seeing here, this high performance group started off running roughly 2 kilometers an hour faster than their average pace. When we take a look down here at the bottom, they were only roughly half a kilometer faster, right? So what does this mean? What does 2 kilometers per hour mean? It's roughly 1.5 miles per hour right here, right? This is roughly, or actually, I'm sure that that's actually incorrect. It's about, 0.62 miles equals a kilometer, so 1.2 miles, less than half a mile an hour, something to that effect. Definitively faster on the top. Let's go with that. All right, so what we can see is the high performance group ultimately started out faster, came down into an even pacing, where we still ultimately see a decline in the pace. It's going to happen. And then what we see here is a classical end spurt where they get to a given distance from the finish line and it's just time to start ramping it up. So great illustration right here of what I personally think is a really, really good pacing strategy for either a 5K or a 10K. That is, whether that be an open or off the bike. I think that for somebody who can run, let's say, sub 145 for a guy in a half marathon open, and sub 155 for a gal in an open half marathon, great pacing strategy. I think when we get to the marathon, for a guy who can run sub 330 as an open marathon, for a gal who can run under a 345 in an open marathon, great pacing strategy. For the people that are not quite there in terms of athletic ability, I think that this can become a very, very risky strategy, because if this simply just continues to drop and drop and drop and drop until you're walking, that's not a really good result, right? So for the high performing athletes that are listening to this, the fast start, even pacing end spurt, outstanding theory, outstanding way to approach a run. Right? So what are we looking at? What do we want to look at for somebody who is not that super fast runner? Somebody who is, in it for fun, they're just into it and they're getting stronger and faster every day. It really just depends on the distance of the event and your experiences running that, right? So for a sprint distance event, for an inexperienced runner, I would simply aim at even pacing. Try to maintain the same pace for the entire 3.1 miles. We get up to the 10K, we can look at even pacing. We could look at negative splits. That's a potential, right? Or we could just simply get to the variable pacing, where the goal is I'm going to do my best to maintain this pace throughout the entire thing, right? And what happens is what happens, especially if terrain is associated with it. When we get to the half Ironman and the Ironman distance, we start really getting into if you're having a hard time running, let's say, under 2 hours at a half marathon on the bike, off the bike, we need to make you a stronger runner. That's ultimately what it's coming down to. There is a possibility that you just simply rode like a wild man with your hair on fire and that took it out of your legs, but chances are if you can't run under 2, we need to just simply make you a stronger runner, right? So what's some pacing strategies for the half Ironman that's going to work really well? Aiming at negative splits for somebody who's going to go over 2 hours, that's a definite possibility. Run the first half in 1 hour and run the second half in 59:55. There's your negative splits, right? What's the end result of that? Pretty much even pacing throughout the whole thing, right? If I said to you, hey, lock it in at this pace, stay there the entire time, do not slow down, right? That puts a lot more mental stress on you. That puts a lot more pressure on you. And most triathletes, type A people, they get a little bit of pressure put on them and they take that very seriously. Now all of a sudden, their performance is starting to drop off because somebody put way too much stress on them or pressure on them for no reason, right? So negative pacing definitely could work for a half Ironman. What are some other options? You could aim at even pacing. That's always the even pacing. If we have to pick a strategy that is not variable kind of just accounts for everything. It is what it is based off where you're at in the terrain and the weather. Got it. Okay. So if we're going to not purposely pick that one, if we want a more defined strategy for the half marathon in a half Ironman, the negative splits, we talked about that, could be really good. Aiming at the even pacing, not a bad idea, right? But ultimately, the variable pacing is going to be the best because you're going to do what you can do at that time. And when we get to an Ironman, for somebody who, is running, let's say 4 hours or more, I would take a look at negative splits. That would probably be your best bet. For somebody who's 5 hours or more, I just simply would try to maintain. I would aim at even pacing. Try to maintain it as best you can, and as soon as that falls off, we're going to end up at variable pacing. So those are the basic guidelines that I would give you for pacing in a run off of the bike. All right. So here's a couple more graphs real quick. This is from an ITU event, Draft Legal. This was the guys. You can see what's happening here with the running speed. He's definitely starting off nice and high, drops off, has an end spurt. We see the same basic thing with the ladies that we're doing the same race. Starts off faster, drops off, picks up at the end. Right, that's your variable pacing. All right, so how do we determine what pace to run at? Now we have a strategy. Okay, this is what I want to do. I want to have negative splits. I want to have even pacing. I want to have positive pacing. I'm just going to go with variable pacing. Whatever it is, that's outstanding. How are we going to determine what pace you got to run at? If we're going to do negative splits, how do we determine, hey, what do I need to do? Do I need to run at an 8-minute pace for the first half and then a 7-minute pace for the second half? Nope. That's a good way to set yourself up for failure. Right? So what do we need to do for the pacing? And the things that we want to take into account, we need to use the correct metrics to measure running intensity. That is going to be the key to determining a pacing strategy, to executing a pacing strategy, and to performance at the end of the day. Right? So without beating the dead horse of output versus input metrics, shorter than the one when I said that previously, output metric, power on the bike, running speed on the run. That is your output. That is how fast you're going. An input metric is generated by your output, right? So if you're running at a given speed, if you're running at a 12-minute mile pace, that might give you a heart rate of 120 beats a minute. We go to 10 minutes a mile, we're now maybe at 130 beats a minute. We go to 8 minutes a mile, now we're at 155 beats a minute. We go to 7-minute mile, now we're at 167 beats a minute, right? That beat per minute, the heart rate, is being determined by the output, which is either power output on the bike or running speed on the run. So what are we going to use? We're going to use run pace. We're going to use pacing on the run in order to determine how fast should I be running and how do I actually lay out a race plan based with the pacing strategy, and then how do I execute it, right? So the two metrics we're going to use is VLT or VVO2, little v for velocity, right? So VLT, velocity at lactate threshold, little v VO2, velocity at VO2 max, right? Super duper simple. Here's how we calculate this. We're going to use the McMillan Run calculator, right? There's the web address. You enter in a time for a known distance time trial that you did or one of your athletes did, and it's going to give you estimated race times and the VLT numbers, right? So if I have a sample athlete, Jane Doe, she goes out, runs a 5K for a time trial, comes back in 21 minutes. I put it into the Macmillan calculator, and it's going to spit something back that looks exactly like this. All right, so her velocity at lactate threshold, 712. That's it right there. Her velocity at VO2 max, 612. All right, so with that, if she's going to run a 5K, we know what it is. If she's going to run a 10K, now I have a predicted time, 43:37. If she's going to run a half marathon, now I have a predicted time, 1:37. If she's going to run a marathon, now I have a predicted time, 3:24, along with the pace per mile for each of those. Right? That's a tremendous amount of great information right there, right? So with that, let's take this same example and expand it out, right? So if this gal Jane Doe is going to do a marathon, or she's going to do an Ironman, right? We know that based off her 21-minute 5K time, we would predict that she would run an open marathon in 3:24:37. In general, for a really solid, strong runner, we're going to add 20 minutes to their open marathon time. That's going to be their time in an Ironman, right? So I would say for a guy, definitely sub 3:30. For a gal, definitely sub 3:45. You might even be able to extend that up to 4 hours for the ladies. If it's more than that for the guys and the gals, then you're probably going to want to add about 30 minutes. All right. So we know Macmillan said, or we know she went out, she ran the 5K in 21 minutes. Macmillan predicts her marathon, open marathon time at 3:24. We tack on 20 minutes to that. We know her goal time for Ironman is a 3:44. Right. So what we need to do is determine what pacing do we even want to try to use here. Right. So with that, we have two choices. We have what is she going to do in training, right? That's important. What is she going to do in racing, right? If we're trying to lay out a race plan, one that this lady can use to develop a pacing strategy and then execute it on race day, do we want to use the pace that's based off the Ironman time, 3:44, which is an 8:33 mile, or do we want to use the open marathon time of 3:24, which is the equivalent of a 7:47? In training, we need to run the open time, right? Because we didn't just ride 112 miles every single time we go out for a run. So we're going to use the open time, 7:47. When it comes to what is she going to do in race day, what are we really wanting to see happen, or what are we expecting in training after a big, long bike ride? 8:33. Right? So we need to be able to pick the right pace, which is going to give us the right zones. Once we have the zones, we can take that, plug it into a pacing strategy. Now we know exactly what we got to do. Now we can determine this is what we got to do. Now you got to just go out and execute it. That's that easy, right? So with that, the training pace for this example needs to be based off the 3:24. The Ironman pace off the 3:44, right? So if we take a look here at zone 2, let's say that she's going out for a long run in training. Zone 2 for her, and this is all based off of the calculations inside of Training Peaks using Joe Friel's run method using threshold speed, I believe it is. Anything from an 8:10 to a 9:15 pace, right? And this is when I enter in her VLT at 7:10, right? Anything from 8:10 to 9:15, that's her training zone 2 pace, right? If I tell her, hey, on race day, you need to go run something between, you need to stay between 8:10 and 9:15. That's zone 2, right? Where am I actually putting her? I'm actually putting her in zone 3 on race day. Is that beneficial to her? No. That's a really good way to jack her up, all right? So on race day, her zone 2 is between 8:56 and 10:06. That needs to be the pace, the range that she's looking at plugging into her pacing strategy. All right, so that's big. There's your two parts of it, guys and gals. All right, so let me go back and give you a quick summary here. All right, so 4 different pacing strategies: negative pacing, even pacing, positive pacing, variable pacing. Negative pacing, everybody gets it. You know, all you need to have 1 or 2 second difference between the first and second half, you've executed negative pacing or negative splits. Positive pacing, right? We're going to just go and it's going to fall off as we progress through the race, all right? That's really risky for anything more than about a sprint, unless you are a very seriously high caliber athlete or you are a professional trying to win a race. When we get to even pacing, great strategy, especially in triathlons at all distances, but it's based on the terrain. If you have flat, steady, consistent terrain, even pacing is great. If you have hills and wind and all kinds of crazy stuff, even pacing can be very difficult to execute. And we got the fourth one, variable pacing, which was the fast start, the even pacing in the middle, and then an end spurt. That is the general formula for variable pacing. All right, so you got it all. You now know how to select the right paces to put into the pacing strategy. Now all you got to do the math, develop the race plan, go out and execute it. Pretty simple, right? So, all right, quick reminder, 6-month or 12-month option with the membership program. You're entered in to win that guy right there. 6-month is 1 entry, 12-month is 2 entry. Next Triathlon Study Hall will be next Tuesday, September 29th. Same time, same location. There's your registration link right there. Please give me till tomorrow afternoon to get that updated. If you want to give that MPro a shot, 2-week free trial, MPro-2-weeks. There's no further commitment. You just got to give it a shot, see if you like it. If you like it, we'll keep going. If you don't, we'll go our separate ways and see each other out at the races. So, okay, guys, let's get to any questions that we have. I got 3 of them in so far. Any more questions, go ahead and type them in. All right, so we got Brian with a great question. I have a 3-week taper before Ironman Arizona. What do I do with all the energy? Brian, if I had that answer, I would write a book about it and I would be a millionaire. But to give you a more serious answer, that's a very challenging thing for people who are really preparing for an Ironman, that are doing a lot of training, that are training really hard. That's a very challenging thing. The traditional taper that I will use for an Ironman is 3 weeks long. The first week, most people can't even really tell that it's a taper week, other than the way the workouts are organized are a little bit different. I'll go with the one hard race specific session every 3 days, and I'll basically use backward planning from race day to count backwards for that. Everything else is an aerobic event, and it is designed to shed fatigue. It's designed to increase freshness and top off any aerobic endurance or aerobic base, in air quotes, that we might have lost through some more advanced training as we're preparing and getting into the later part of the training for an Ironman. So what do you do with the energy? I don't have a really good answer for you on that. Everybody has to find their own thing. Don't add workouts in. Don't increase the intensity. Don't increase the volume. Don't increase any of that stuff. Follow the plan. Trust in the plan. Right? So whether it be foam rolling, whether it be stretching, whether it be anything like that, get some extra sleep, read a book, whatever it may be. Just get your mind off of it and get focused in on the race. And Lisa, with an outstanding comment at the end, Lisa highly recommends sex. So if you have that option, that definitely works. Just don't throw out your back. All right, Lisa, thank you for the contribution. So Brian with the follow-up. So in other words, don't go and remodel the house. Remodeling the house is not a bad idea, just as long as you're not, hauling big giant wooden beams and smacking your hand with a hammer, or dropping something on your foot would be a bigger concern. Just keep it within reason. Just make sure it makes sense, right? If you had to explain that to your significant other, hey, I went and did this, and that's going to prevent me from racing, and I'm really sorry. I've been gone all this time for training for an Ironman, but I dropped this on my foot. If that is going to be a hard conversation for you, then you probably need to take a look at what it is you're looking at doing and see if that makes sense. All right. So great questions, Brian. All right. We got Lisa. All right. So Lisa says, much of my running plan includes running 15-minute intervals with a 1-minute walk. What is the reasoning behind this? And is this a strategy you would suggest for a longer distance event, i.e. her half marathon? Lisa, outstanding question. So what this is basically using a run-walk strategy, right? So she's running for 15 minutes, walk a minute, run for 15, walk a minute. And that's the foundation of her aerobic training as she's preparing for this half marathon. The reasoning for this is that 1-minute walk gives you a mental recovery and it gives you a physical recovery for that 1 minute. While that might be incredibly brief, it is incredibly valuable, right? All of the supporting musculature is going to get to relax. all of the major prime movers, right? So the quadriceps, hamstring, calves, glutes, whatever it may be that you're using while running, are going to get a 60-second break, right? And so is this a strategy I would suggest for longer distance events? Yes, absolutely. I would actually be less inclined to suggest this on race day for a 5K or for a 10K. If it's in a triathlon, the 5K, run the 5K, run the sprint triathlon. You should be able to run the 3.1 miles. When you get to the 10K, using a run walk strategy is a really good idea. And the thing that most people don't ever see at an Ironman, especially Kona when it's on TV, the cameras don't ever show the pros who walk through the aid station. They don't ever show them doing a run walk strategy. They 90%, 95% of them walk at some point during the marathon. And it's not because they're, oh, look, they're wussies and they can't run the whole thing. That's obviously not the case. They simply realize that in triathlon, the aid stations are normally set up a mile apart, right? So if your body is trained to run for a given amount of time, then walk for a very short period. Run, walk, run, walk. Your body has been prepared not only from the physical side, but from the neuromuscular side and neuromechanical side to do that. If you don't do that in training, you're going to get to a point where you're like, all right, I can't run anymore. I got to take a walk break. So you'll walk for 60 seconds, you'll get running again. But there's going to be a very short lifespan to that. If your body is not used to run, walk, you're going to have a very hard time executing it. So in the context of an open half marathon, in terms of training, the 15-minute segments that are on, I think our average pace when we take a look at the entire time spent running is going to be higher with those 1 minute walks in than it would be if we just simply had you run the entire time. Would I have you do that in a half marathon? That's up to you. That's a conversation we're going to have as we get closer to that. Would I have you do that in a marathon? Yes, absolutely, without a single doubt in my mind. Okay. If you're doing if anybody's doing a half marathon or a half Ironman, would I recommend that? Yes, absolutely. Run from aid station to aid station to aid station. Walk through the aid station. When you're walking through the aid station, it has been Ryan certified that you will actually get more fluid in your mouth than you will all over you when you try running through the aid station and grabbing stupid Gatorade or Powerade cup or whatever it is. Walk through it, get your heart rate down a little bit, get a little bit recovered, get the fluid and the nutrition into your system instead of all over your top and all over your face, right? It's going to be an overall beneficial thing. So Lisa, outstanding question. Thank you. What is the reasoning behind some of the shorter, easier runs that come after a hard workout? Well, Lisa, if you're referring to recovery runs, like something that would be 30 minutes or less in zone 1, the goal is simply to take advantage of active recovery. It's getting your body moving. It is getting blood flowing through the tissue, and that's ultimately the benefit. There's other benefits such as frequency. Running is a neuromuscular or neuromechanical sport. The more frequency, the more repetition we have, the better we will run. So that's a simple frequency session also. But ultimately the goal is recovery. So good question, Lisa. All right, guys and gals. Hey, thank you very much for coming out to the Triathlon Study Hall this evening. I had a great time talking with you about pacing strategies and run strategy. I hope you guys all got some really great info out of this and are able to apply this to your training. And quick reminder, the next Triathlon Study Hall call next Tuesday, September 29th. All right, guys and gals, thanks again, and I will see you next time.